Human Rights Law Network is an independent organization dedicated to encourage and promote the human rights agenda at local, national and international levels. Beginning as a small group of lawyers and social activists in 1989, Human Rights Law Network provides legal aid to tens of thousands of persons every year. And today, it has become a pioneer group using public interest litigation to evolve the rights regime in India.
Well, the reason why we started HRLN was basically to provide free legal services to very poor people. And the reason is that in this country, legal work, legal services are just not available for poor people. They can't find the money to go to court, they can't get a lawyer to go to court. So we wanted to train a generation of lawyers who will be committed and work with passion, work with dedication, work with conviction for the working class people. Defend them with courage and a lot of, zeal, energy and love for the cause of human rights. So it's not just a passive thing where you do a case and forget about it. It's involvement with people, learning from people, going out to areas where the people live, not expecting the lawyer to come to you. That was the mission of HRLN. Attack bad laws, ask for new laws, train the judges, train policemen, train NGOs, work inside movements. That's the most important thing. Work inside the social movement and help the social movement in whatever way possible, in a humble way, help the social movement. That is the core. Legal aid to strengthen social movements.
Human Rights Law Network, through its various state units, provides legal aid, conducts training and networking on human rights laws, and organizes independent people's tribunals to highlight gross violations of human rights. As a nationwide collective of dedicated lawyers and social activists, Human Rights Law Network has emerged as a leading network of human rights defenders in India.
HRLN is a unique institution. It has helped a large number of people who have suffered violation of human rights through court. They have done a lot of work. See, whenever there is a violation of human rights, there are very few people who take up the case and fight for it in the court. This one institution has been fighting for, it's not only for legal rights, also for human rights, and that they have been doing it all over the country. This is one institution, a large number of their units working in different parts of the state, different parts of the country, and so it is a very, very, very important institution, I would consider, in the whole country. There is hardly any other institution which is working like Human Rights Law Network in the country. All others are here and there, some issues, but Human Rights Law Network takes up all issues of related to human rights. Today, otherwise, very difficult to send poor man to go and fight litigation. Litigation becomes so costly that ordinarily you can't take up the litigation from the lower court right up to Supreme Court. But Human Rights Law Network does that. It can fight a case in the district court, it can fight a case in the High Court, it can fight a case in the Supreme Court. See, that's the importance of Human Rights Law Network.
The film features the groundbreaking cases taken up by Human Rights Law Network to reinforce the right to provide legal assistance in defense of human rights, the right to observe trials, taking a stand against injustice, and being a voice for the powerless. In the late 1990s, reports of hunger and starvation deaths continued from various parts of the country, especially in the state of Rajasthan, where there were reports of widespread starvation deaths due to droughts of the late 1990s and early 2000s. The situation was grim despite the fact that 60 million tons of grain were rotting in the Food Corporation of India's godowns. Human Rights Law Network filed a public interest litigation in the Supreme Court in April 2001 on behalf of the People's Union for Civil Liberties to seek legal enforcement of the right to food.
If you look at the right to food case, it's a historic case in many ways because it impacted about 350 million people, one case. Midday meals for students, supplementary nutrition for women, right to work came in after that, pensions for old people, historic case. And the importance of the case is that when human rights are to be implemented, there can never be an excuse that government doesn't have the funds. I'm giving you this as an example of how the approach to the law changed. Because the court said in that matter, when the government said we have no money to feed people in India, the court said, cut the flab somewhere else. Cut the flab somewhere else.
Supreme Court hearings have been held at regular intervals since April 2001, and significant interim orders have been passed from time to time, directing the Indian government to implement the food and social security schemes.
And by a series of stunning orders, the Supreme Court reinstated the midday meal scheme. The Supreme Court said that the Anganwadi centers should be doubled from 6 lakh centers to 12 lakh centers. The Supreme Court began an investigation into corruption in the public distribution system and strengthened the system of ration shops. The Supreme Court reinforced the scheme, the Annapurna scheme, where old people get a sack of grain every month. The Supreme Court said pensions to old people should be paid by the 7th of each month. The Supreme Court said that there should be a food for work program and questioned the government and said, what's happened to the right to work in this country? Should you not have a statute? And ultimately, as you know, now we have the Employment Guarantee Act. And the Supreme Court said you must implement the maternity benefit scheme where poor women got 500 rupees for every childbirth. That is what the Supreme Court did. It reinforced the notion that food security for poor people is mandatory in India, and the government cannot say, we have no money, we have no funds, we have no resources. It's not acceptable. They must implement the food security scheme in the country.
After the Supreme Court of India's intervention in 2001, various rights groups throughout the country have launched a national right to food campaign which forced the government agencies to monitor the implementation of Supreme Court orders and various food security schemes crucial for the right to food.
The second contribution that the Right to Food campaign will perhaps make, which will be a very lasting contribution, if it works out the way that the people's movements and the Right to Food campaign and civil society organizations in India wanted to, is to enshrine the right to food as a fundamental right in the Indian Constitution, is to enact a legislation which would make the right to food a fundamental right, because then it would become a justiciable right, much in the same way that 100 days of employment today has enshrined in law a legal entitlement, a right for every citizen to have access to 100 days of employment. The right to food would enshrine in law the right through legislation. And if the legislation does indeed work out the way it is proposed, it would be another landmark step and a landmark contribution of the right to food case to the entire, not just to the entire jurisprudence of the right to food, but also to the entire discourse on the right to food becoming legal in many countries. India would be a pioneer country, in fact.
As an integral part of the larger right to food movement in India, Human Rights Law Network has played a central role in exposing the government's inability to recognize the food security crisis in the country and using the legal system working in solidarity with POCL to correct the situation. The POCL case and subsequent milestone court orders created the atmosphere to have a national food security bill.
2009 elections, the UPA or the Congress had promised in its manifesto to create a law which gives an enforceable right to food. I have little doubt that this is very unlikely to have happened without this case having incrementally created a legal right to food through court orders. I think the point was reached when the political establishment felt that if they have to give these rights, then why leave it to the court? Why not Parliament itself and the executive take responsibility and credit for these rights? And that's why the idea of a right to food is coming out. And we are arguing that what the Supreme Court has done should lay the base. We want a law which goes beyond the Supreme Court orders, but what minimally must be assured is already indicated by the Supreme Court order.
The Government of India has come out with the National Food Security Bill, which aims to offer subsidized food grains to 75% of the below poverty line rural population and 50% of the urban population. The bill entitles 68% of the country's population